for downloading this episode of Cork Talk with me, Tim Atkin. A weekly conversation with some of the most famous people in the world of wine. Bryan MacRobert grew up on a farm near Cape Town and always wanted to be a winemaker. Working for Eben Sadie in Priorat gave him the chance to travel to Spain, where he's lived with his oenologist wife Clara Canals since 2012. One of a new generation of vineyard-focused Rioja producers, he has strong views about good farming, the wisdom of old ways, the potential of the region's white wines, and the way out of the current crisis. Hello, Bryan. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Tim. Thanks for welcoming me onto the podcast today. Looking forward to chatting a bit about everything in my history and what's coming up and what we're up to.
Yeah. We're going to talk South Africa. We're also going to talk Rioja, which is where you are at the moment. You're in Logroño, I think, aren't you?
Yes, it's correct. I'm in Logroño in Spain, which is the center of Rioja.
Just had a thunderstorm, so we're hoping that the gods of the internet will be kind to us.
Let's hope so. Yeah, we had quite a lot of rain and some lightning.
Well, listen, we're going to get on to Spain in a minute, but as your mild South African accent demonstrates, you were born and brought up in the Cape. Tell us a bit about your family, because your parents were farmers, weren't they?
Yeah, that's correct. I was born in Cape Town and grew up on a farm close to Cape Town. My father, he's always wanted to farm, and he bought a small farm when I was very small, when I was 5. And we moved to a farm in Malmesbury, which is just north of Cape Town, and there was a farm with vineyards and some wheat and sheep and generally the usual stuff you kind of grew in Malmesbury, and that's where I grew up. So I grew up, in the Swartland.
And what were the vineyards like? Oh, some old vine stuff or not?
We had Hanepoort, which is Muscat Alexandre, and Chenin Blanc, which was pretty much, the varieties that were around then. We can maybe get into it a bit later, but I mean, we had the traditional sort of varieties you'd kind of find in the Swartland. You'd find all over, and one of them was Chenin Blanc, and the other one was Hanepoort. Yeah. It's
funny. I've just got back from the Swartland. I was at the Swartland Revolution, which is why I've got a slightly sore throat because I was shouting and singing so much. And this region has become very well known and fashionable, both in South Africa and overseas. I mean, what was it like when you were growing up? I mean, was it fashionable for wine? It wasn't really, was it?
No, it was more. It was a farming community. The Malmesbury and the Malmesbury is the capital of the Swartland, so that's why I went to school as well, my junior school, and it was a different place 20, 30 years back, or we're talking even 40 years back. So, it was a small town, small village, very rural, service town, Malmesbury. And the Swartland basically was a region that was based on wheat production, livestock, sheep, some cattle, some dairy, and then vineyards. You had your vineyards were kind of, the farmers would generally kind of diversify, and the vineyards were kind of the extra thing you had to keep your workers busy, your staff busy during the year. So most of the farmers and grape growers had a bit of a mixed production. Yeah.
So it didn't have a good reputation for its wines, really, did it?
No, it didn't have a good reputation for wine. I mean, there was always Stellenbosch or Franschhoek or the traditional wine regions, of South Africa. But it has got quite a long history of grape cultivation in Swartland. I think, almost 300 years they've been growing grapes in the Swartland.
Yeah, and you said the main varieties were Chenin and Hanepoort, which is Muscat d'Alexandre. That's changed a lot now, hasn't it? I mean, were there red grapes there even? Cinsault, things like that?
It's changed. It's changed a lot. I mean, if you think back 30 years ago, you basically just had two cooperatives. You had the Darling Cellars and Swartland Co-op, and they were telling the farmers what to plant. So basically what was being planted is what the cooperative was was dictating, and they would plant a lot of white Chenin Blanc. The reds were Cinsault, and then sort of in the early 90s we started getting Syrah, Cabernet, the French varieties, and we were planting those. There's actually a couple of old Tinta Barocca blocks in the Swartland, but generally I think it was white Semillon, red Semillon, Chenin Blanc, Hanepoort. And then there were a couple of fun, other small blocks of other things. But I mean, those are the kind of varieties they had in the Swartland in those days. So yeah.
Who lit the spark that changed it? Was it Charles Back? I mean, Charles Back then employed Eben Sadie, obviously, but what was it that changed it? And we're only talking 25 years ago, really, aren't we?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the changes come fast. So I think there are two factors that played a role. One was seeing that the region was different to Stellenbosch or Paarl or Wellington. You know, you definitely have more West Coast climate in South Africa, which is more Mediterranean climate. And so I think Charles Back saw that, and he started focusing more on maybe Mediterranean varieties, maybe a bit more on Syrah. And then he brought on board Eben. Eben started working for him at Spice Route. So I grew up just quite close to Spice Route. So I know I was there when Eben started making wine there in the beginning. And Tom Libber was also around. Mustn't forget about Tom Libber being Observatory wines he made there in 2000. So there were a couple of people that came in, I think, you know, into the Swartland in the in the 2000s, and they were basically very passionate and people that loved wine and loved doing what they were doing. But I think there was another factor that also allowed for the growth and for people to actually start a renaissance or kind of like a revolution, really, was the fact that there were a lot of grapes on the farms and planted in the region, and the two cooperatives were basically suffering because they were essentially dryland cultivators. You know, the vineyards were dryland, and your average production in Swartland Co-op was under 6 tons a hectare. Okay, now when you're selling bulk wine, the bulk wine price, it's no ways you can make money at 6 tons a hectare, because the bulk wine prices are running at 16, 18, 20 tons a hectare. So Swartland and Darling, I don't know much, but I know more about Swartland. They really started to suffer with the bulk wine price, because the quality was just far superior to what was in the bulk wine market. But the problem is your price is dictated per litre, especially on the cooperative game. So they really were struggling financially, and what happened is they couldn't pay the members anymore, you know, and the vineyards were still in the ground. And some people came along and said, "Hey, listen, we'll pay you a decent price for those vineyards, you know, if you keep them." So there was a bit of two factors, I think, that led to the Swartland being where it is today. There was the right people and the fact that you had great vines, 20, 30-year-old, 40-year-old vineyards, which were up for grabs. And people have made full advantage of that. So I think, and they've really, you know, embraced the dry land cultivation of the vineyards. They've embraced the you know, where they can actually start, you know, promoting and saying the quality that you have. And that's, I think, why today in the Swartland we've got the people that are there, and we've got the following we've got, and it's just an amazing place as well. And it's not showy. It's just a great agricultural place, you know.
It's very different from Stellenbosch, isn't it? But
it's very different.
Yeah. I wonder, was there ever a chance you were going to do anything other than make wine? I mean, did you consider other careers? I know you worked on a yacht, didn't you, for a while, sailed to Brazil, but I mean, I presume that wasn't going to be a career, was it?
Well, you know, when you're 20, it's kind of anything goes. So I was definitely, you know, before studying winemaking, I took 2 years after school off, and I was traveling. And one of the ways of traveling was to bum a ride on a yacht. So you kind of get taken on as the crew, and you work as a deckhand on the boat, and you get a free ride and free accommodation. So it was a fantastic way to travel. So I did a bit of that just before studying, and I was really, in a way, I was looking at it. I was about to do my skipper's ticket and that, but then I decided that for me, I really wanted to do agriculture, and that's why I ended up going to Stellenbosch, and then I ended up doing obviously winemaking.
Yeah, you graduated there in viticulture and enology, as many of the best winemakers in South Africa have done. And then you went to work at Lammershoek, which is one of the Swartland's best-known names. Lots of old vineyards again. I just wondered what you learned there. Did you learn much? Because you started making wine pretty much immediately under your own label as well, didn't you?
I did. You know, I was already making wine, fermenting wine in barrels, as you know, while I was in my second year. You know, at home, crushing grapes, and they're kind of a great advantage of having vineyards on the farm. You know, you could basically you know, you could experiment. So we were already experimenting, you know, with a hand crusher, crushing grapes and fermenting, and from an early age, you know, trying out things. And then I wanted to start making wine from my family's vineyards and from my parents' vineyards, and also from a couple of my neighbors' vineyards, trying something new, because everyone was like, you know, I started seeing at Lammershoek, you know, they had the Roulette Blanc and the Roulette Rouge, which were fantastic blends. But I mean, the Roulette Blanc was a beautiful blend with Chenin Blanc, Roussanne, some Grenache, Grenache Blanc, I think it was in there, Claret Branch. So it was a fantastic like Rhone blend with Chenin Blanc. And that was really a new style of white wine in South Africa at that time. So we're talking, you know, mid-2000s. And beautiful texture, volume, concentration. And I started, I wanted to start making my own Chenin Blanc from where we were, because we grew up, basically I said we were close to Spice Route. So we were on a slightly more southwestern side of the Swartland, so slightly cooler than the Paardeberg. So I started making Chenin Blanc for my neighbor's vineyard there. And then we pulled out our old vineyards because they weren't producing anything in 2000, and we replanted them with Syrah and Mourvèdre, 2 red varieties, in 2000. So then by 2005, I started producing this little wine from our Mourvèdre block and from our Syrah. And that's how I started. So my red was a blend of Syrah, Mourvèdre, and Cinsault, and the white was a Chenin Blanc. And that's what I started experimenting with, and they were great wines. Yeah.
And how did you get the job with Eben Sadie, of Sadie Family Wines, which was next door? You got the job as assistant winemaker, didn't you?
Yeah, I was basically contracting and working for him, 9 months of the year, and helping basically with his 3 projects, which was Sequilo Cellars, the Sadie Family Wines, and then in Terroir Limit. So I was spending 3 months of the year in Terroir Limit and 9 months of the year in South Africa. And I suppose, through knowing Eben, because I knew Eben before I even studied winemaking. There was a contact there, and then when I was working at Lammersoek, everyone talk, everyone's friends, and you end up having a couple of glasses of wine after working every night, and so it's very sociable. So at the end, I said to Eben, could I go to Priorat? And he said, yeah, we're looking for someone. So then I went to Priorat for that harvest, which is the later on in the year, in September, October, November. And then after, they said, well, come work for me in South Africa. So then that's when I started working for him in South Africa. And it was very easy because I was living at home, basically, back to the Swartland. So it was a great experience. Yeah.
And how did he influence you, in particular your winemaking style? Was he an inspirational person to work with?
Eben's a very inspirational person to work for. He's I think I learned a lot of things working for him. Stylistically, I think, in a way, you obviously pick up the styles of the people you work for, just the way you pick up the way they work, and you kind of copy them in a way, and subconsciously, or just the way you start your protocols, you work in your mind. But I think, what I learned from Eben was to trust the terroir, make sure you get good grapes in the winery, work really hard in the vineyard, because the better you work in the vineyard, the better the grapes are going to be, the better the wine's going to be, believe in the primary product, which is the grapes. And I think that's really what I learned working for Eben, and so many other things I learned, working for him, and business-wise, company-wise, winemaking-wise, many things. So it was a great time.
You said that you had these 3 vintages in Priorat, Terroir Limit, with Dominic Huber and Eben as well. Any similarities between the Swartland and Priorat? One's coastal. They've both got coastal influences, haven't they? Both are, really.
Yeah, they're both Mediterranean climates, except in South Africa you have penguins and great whites. I think they're very similar in that way, because you are dealing with warm, dry climates. In the Swartland we've got slate, and in Priorat you've got a lot of slate, basically just slate. But in the Swartland you've got slate, you've got granite, you've got even some mixed double layer, they call them oak leaves or glen roses. They're kind of like your older soils that form from the slates or granites. So red soils, orange soils, you've got sandy soils. You've got all that in the Swartland, where Priorat is pretty much just slate. But you do have that similarity. We're working with Syrahs from slate, we're working with Carignan and Grenache from slate. So it was great to, even Cinsault on slate. So it was great to see the comparisons of slate in South Africa and slate in Priorat. And then you're dealing with a warm, dry climate. So there were similarities in that respect. And in certain varieties, Grenache, Carignan, and some Syrah and stuff like that. So I definitely did feel at home in Priorat, because, you could kind of correlate or relate to what we were doing in the Swartlands. And generally your winemaking style, what you would do in the winery, would be very similar to what you do in the Swartland. In Rioja, I had almost changed the way I make wine completely. I had almost turn around and do the opposite of what I do in the Swartland. So we're dealing with a continental climate, limestone soils, different varieties. So yeah.
Let's talk now about Spain, because you're in Spain, and I want the second half of the interview to be about Spain. Let's talk about your wife, Clara Canals. Fantastic, Clara. When did you guys meet? Because I think you met in the Swartland, didn't you? Not in Spain, right?
Yeah, we met in the Swartland. We met. I was actually on Adi Bardenhoff's farm. So I think a lot of people met on Kalmusfontein. So we were one of the first to meet on Kalmusfontein. So So yeah, we met there in 2010, basically through mutual friends. So basically, when you finish winemaking, it's common to travel and do harvests between Northern Hemisphere, Southern Hemisphere, and you basically form a network of friends. And one of her friends that she'd formed friends with in New Zealand were some of my South African friends that I studied with, and they convinced her to move to come for the harvest in South Africa. And then she came to South Africa. I met her then, and she's like, "I'll see you in Priorat." I'm like, "Yeah, whatever, we'll see you there." And then we saw her in Priorat, and then she came back to South Africa, and then basically, yeah, that's how things start. That's it.
And do you share the same taste in wine? Because your name is together on the label now, isn't it?
We do. I think we got similar tastes in wine. We appreciate the same things, especially when we're looking at Rioja. We have got very similar idea and appreciate the same things. Yeah. So yeah, we more agree than disagree for sure.
Mm-hmm. And did she convince you to move to Logroño in Rioja?
Well, I mean, I think at the end of the day, Clara got a permanent job in Rioja, which was a good job, and I was flexible because I was making my own wine. So I kind of said, okay, I'll come to Rioja and keep making my wine at a distance. And that's how it started out. That's how I moved to Rioja in the beginning. And then when I was in Rioja, I started seeing a bit of potential, and it really started interesting me as a wine region. It's only once you're there, you really start to understand how of a special place it is.
Yeah, I mean, did you know anything about it before you went there?
Not much. I mean, you learn what you learn in WCT, or you learn, what you learn in wine school. Basically 3 pages about Crianza Reserva, Gran Reserva.
Yeah.
It's Spain's biggest wine region, or oldest DO, and that's it. You don't know much more than that. So I was really shocked when I really started to dive a bit deeper into Rioja and see a lot more. Yeah.
And how easy did you find it to fit in? I mean, having a Spanish girlfriend soon to become your wife must have helped, I suppose. And you learning the language, weren't you? Yeah.
No, you definitely have to learn the language. I mean, language is culture. So if you don't speak the language, you won't fit in. So it definitely was a big part for me to learn the language and to start to fit in. So yeah, I do. I went to the University of Rioja to study Spanish culture, and it was an excuse to get a visa as well, to stay longer, because we could only get 3-month visas. So when at least we're staying, I can get a full visa for a year. so that's also went to the University of Rioja. And it's crucial, the languages, but it just opens up so much more barriers, so much more for, once you can speak the language.
And people tell you much more as well, obviously. But I mean,
exactly.
if they're speaking in English, they always censor themselves in a sense, don't they? Yeah, they're censored by their own lack of language, in a sense, I suppose.
For sure.
A facility with the language. I mean, you've mentioned this, and I think people often think they know Rioja's wines well, Crianza Reserva, Gran Reserva, blah, blah, blah. But the area is incredibly diverse and complex. We both know this and love it. Just briefly describe the diversity for us. What is it that makes the region so special in terms of terroir and maybe grape varieties?
Well, I think, in terms of terroir, we're in a fantastic climate. We've got a great climate, macroclimate where we are. We have the right amount of rainfall, the right amount of sun. So we've got a very moderate continental climate, which is a fantastic climate to make wine in. Not many people know this, but Rioja is actually quite cool in comparison to Spain. It's a cooler region in Spain. And I think people are shocked when they actually come in and realize that you actually have to wear a jacket in the evening, even in August, you have to maybe put a jacket on. So it has that fantastic side to it. And then you have the soils, and you have microclimates, you have valleys. You've got so many different things to play with as a winemaker, but grape varieties. So that's what makes it special. I mean, we've got a lot of limestone soils. For me, that was a big factor because I had never worked with limestone in South Africa. So for me, it was a big calling card. I said, I can make white wine on limestone. So that was a big calling card for me. Then also drinking some of the old Riojas that I drank, old Rioja wines, some of the old aged Rioja whites. I couldn't believe how they aged, and even the reds. Some of the old Rioja reds, how well they age, and stay with fruits, delicates, very, very, very interesting. The tertiary aromas on the wines just sometimes are sublime. So all those things you kind of start to really work together, and they start to make you really become see that it's a great wine region. I can go into more depth. I can really go into where the soils are situated and that kind of thing. But I think just the general whole, Rioja's got so much more than what you can imagine.
I agree with you. I mean, you made your first wine, didn't you, under the L'Aventura label? I think 2013. What was it? Was it a white or a red?
I made a white and a red. So we basically focused on La Guardia as a center of Rioja Alavesa, and I made a white from a couple of old vineyards. So we talk about the cabezadas, the top parts of the vineyards. We'll go into that. So when your vineyards are older than say 40, 50 years old, you see a tendency in Rioja where the top of the vineyards would be planted with white grapes, like 20, 30% of the vineyard, maybe even 40% of the vineyard would be planted with white grapes, and the bottom part of the vineyard would be planted with red grapes. And it was a tendency to, I think, because it's possible that they were blending the white and the red together, or they weren't really making a distinction between white and red, but also because under the growing conditions, your white wines would give you more production than your reds often, because it'd be much more weighty. And also your white wines would have a high risk of rot. So you put them on the top of the slope, they'd be on a shallower soil and have more air flow and have less risk of rot. So basically, like the top part of the slope would be considered for whites, and the mid slope to bottom part would be for reds.
Would be for reds. So, interesting.
Yeah. So I mean, and this is old. I mean, this is what I love about Rioja and about Spain is you see these practices that have come down from trial and error, not from studying, and you see these beautiful. It's culture. You see the culture part of agriculture, or the heritage, and that's what I love about. One of the other things I love about Rioja, you see this. So we made white wines from those vineyards. Found a couple of old plots, and the red wine was basically one plot that we had, and we made a straight whole bunch in 2013. Yeah.
Of what, a Tempranillo or Garnacha or what?
It was an old vine, so it was about 80% Tempranillo, and another about 10-15% was white varieties.
Of the whites, yeah. And when did the MacRobert and Canals name start? Straight away, or because L'Aventura to start with, wasn't it?
It was L'Aventura to start with, yeah. So we had the winery was L'Aventura Bodega Viñedos, which is winery and vineyards. And we were until 2016, we were working as L'Aventura Bodega Viñedos and just making L'Aventura wines, 4 L'Aventura wines. But then in 2016, we started to buy vineyards. I bought a vineyard in La Guardia. My father-in-law bought another vineyard in La Guardia, in Villabuena. So then we rebuilt a cellar. We made a cellar winery in an industrial building in Logroño. So I felt by then it was basically a co-effort between myself and the Canals. So we started as MacRobert and Canals. Okay. And L'Aventura is a beautiful name. It means, if in Spanish, quien no sabe aventura no aventura, which means if you've not adventured, you won't venture. So basically nothing.
Which is lovely.
If you haven't risked, you won't gain anything.
Exactly.
So yeah.
Yeah, go on. Yeah, I was going to ask you if it's comparatively easy to buy these vineyards in Rioja, especially given that there's a well-publicized crisis in the region. Is it getting easier in a sense to buy old vineyards?
It is easier now than it was 10 years ago, I think. But it's difficult to find only one good vineyard, because the people, if they want to sell their vineyards, they want to sell the whole lot, and they know that if they sell the good vineyards off, they're going to be stuck with the bad vineyards. So they generally sell the lot, and the problem is most grape growers are 6 hectares, 8 hectares, 12 hectares. So when they want to sell their vineyards, they want to sell the whole lot, and they get a lot price. So, and there's still a couple of companies which got cash and they want to invest, and they rather invest. They've got to spend the money and they have to spend it, and they'll spend it in vineyards. So the price of vineyards is a bit overinflated, for the price compared to the price of the wine in Rioja. And it still is, and there's still investors coming in who are investing in Rioja rather than any other DO. So the vineyard price still maintains quite high, and the demand is still there. Although people are starting to think about selling more now than before. But I think also because there might be a bit of a generational problem there, because the young generation, there's not that many young people coming in as there are 50, 60-year-old grape growers.
Yeah, I mean, some of the co-ops you go to, the average age of the members is 65 or something, I mean, it's a bit worrying, really. How many hectares do you rent, farm and own today?
Okay, so we own about 2.5 hectares. and 1.5 of them are older than 80 years old. So that's something you can't buy that anywhere. It was crazy. In Rioja, you can still buy 80-year-old vineyards. And you're buying something that's it's culture, it's history, it's really something unique. And then we have another hectare that I'm planted into white vineyards, and then I rent another hectare. And in that hectare, there's a 700.7 of a hectare, which is a 105-year-old vineyard. So we've got 2 really old vineyards in our vineyards. Yeah.
It's interesting. We've talked a little bit about old vineyards already. You've said this mixture of grape varieties. I mean, it's amazing when you go into some of these old vineyards, and they had things like Cabernet Sauvignon in them, and Bobal, and and Palomino, all sorts of things. But Rioja suddenly became a bit of a monoculture, really. Most of it planted with Tempranillo. Was that the result of mechanization, do you think, or was it just prevailing tastes that pushed people towards Tempranillo?
I think it was a choice by maybe the wineries and the grape growers. Because I mean, we talk to some. I mean, people have said, I've heard that in the 70s there's more Grenache in Rioja than Tempranillo, and I can believe it.
Definitely, yeah.
Especially in other parts of Rioja, But I think Tempranillo as a grape variety, the problem with Grenache is it's got a very bad flowering temperament. So, during spring, you can have very good flowering, a very good fruit set, where Grenache then can yield a very high yield. Or you can have very poor fruit set, where it can produce very, very low yield. So we're talking like a differentiation between 1 ton or 2 tons a hectare to maybe 12 tons a hectare.
Wow.
And the problem with that is that in Rioja, you got your quota, which you can only produce 6.5 tons a hectare of red grapes. So I think Grenache was a very not very dependable as a variety for the grape growers, because one year they'd be throwing the grapes away, and the other year they wouldn't have enough production. And you don't work with enough margins of profit to throw 10%. You work on a 10%, 15% profit margin. So if one year you're throwing 4 tons away, and the next year you're 4 tons short, then it's a bit frustrating. So I think Tempranillo as a variety won because it's dependable. You knew every year you're going to get your 6.5 tons for a grape grower. But today now we're seeing drought stress on Tempranillo that you've never seen before. So I think that's going to become a major factor in the future.
So is Garnacha coming back because of climate change, do you think? I mean, along with other varieties like Mazuelo, obviously, and Graciano.
Yeah, I think so. I think Tempranillo is going to start. People are going to start to look. Tempranillo was also very much, I think, favored by the wineries because it was a great grape for the Crianza model, because it'd give you color. It's got a small berry, thick skin. Gives you fantastic color. It ages well as well. It needs oak, so it's a fantastic grape for the Crianza model. But I think, when we start looking at maybe changing a bit of less oak, less oxidation on the wines, the other varieties, more acidity, lower pHs. The other varieties have that. Your Grenache, your Graciano, your Mazuelo, they are all known for being high acid, low pH varieties, where Tempranillo is the reverse. So I think you can make fantastic blends using the other varieties with Tempranillo or on their own. So we'll definitely see, I think, a change in the future.
Tell me how winemaking is changing, because Rioja's gone from this cosechero tradition in the 18th and 19th century, or first part of the 19th century, making wines with carbonic maceration, foot treading, and those things still exist. Then we went into the oaked phase. What's the approach now, I mean, for people of your generation? I mean, they're kind of moving away from Crianza Reserva, Grand Reserva, American Oak, and wines that are ready to drink on release, aren't they?
I think in a way, yes. I think the Crianza Reserva, Grand Reserva will still have its market. I mean, they're still great wines. But I think there's a bit of a tendency to look now back at what was done before the Crianza Reserva, Grand Reserva. Because I think, let's not forget that Rioja kind of based their model of aging on a model of perceived quality, where you could age a wine. The longer you age, the better it would be, because you're using, you can't age poor grapes, bad grapes. You can't age them for 4 years or 5 years. It has to be good vineyards. So I think it was basically seen as a way of quality, making quality assessment of your grapes. But I think that the people in Rioja have now realized to revalue what their past before that, and actually start to look at the heritage before that, because if you look at the old vineyards and you look at the old wineries in all the villages, I mean, every village has got a barrio de bodegas, which is literally like the neighborhood of the wine of the wine cellars. or the cellars, where every family would make their wine. There's only one tank for fermenting the wines. So no one separated white, red, or anything. Everything went in the same tank, a lagar. So you see that everything was blended in the old days, and carbonic maceration is how everyone made wines. The old presses didn't even have baskets. They were a press without a basket. So you'd need the whole bunch to keep the bunches together so that you could actually press it. They just basically stick beams and press the beams down, and you'd make a mountain of grapes, and you'd just push them with beams and screws. So you definitely see that the old tradition before Crianza Reserva, Gran Reserva in Rioja was carbonic maceration. And you look at the old vineyards that were planted with different varieties, not just Tempranillo. So when you start to see that, you start to see a whole new world in Rioja. That's changed in the last maybe 60 to 80 years. So when you look at that, you start thinking, hang on, there's an older tradition here than just Crianza Reserva, Gran Reserva, and it's been going on for a long time. And the thing is, people drank their own wines. They didn't drink bad wine. But I also think maybe it was more of a Beaujolais Nouveau kind of concept where you drank the wine at the press. I think the consumption of the wine was rapid. If we talk 100 years ago or 200 years ago, the aging of leaving wine in a barrel and aging it for a year or 2 years, I don't think that was the common process. So it was a quick drink
I
concept.
think people probably didn't have the money, did they? Or the inclination, as you say, because they would drink it themselves, or maybe with their friends, or they might have sold it in a bar in Vitoria or in I don't know, maybe Aro or something.
Some of it got to Vitoria or to the bigger cities, but I think a lot of the old Cosechero wineries, small wineries in the villages, were people just drinking wine for themselves. And I think the harvest time must have been a very jovial time. So yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? If you look at old, what do you call them? Cadastros, I don't know how you say that in English, actually. The vineyard maps, or by municipalities. All these old parcels have got vineyard names, and they've been known as that for centuries. This idea of, the Viñedos Singulares, which was introduced a few years ago in Rioja, being something new. People have always talked about vineyards. You've got an amazing single site, your Barranco de San Ginés. Is there more focus now back on those old sites? People making single parcel wines as opposed to blending across regions or even sub-regions?
Yeah, I think so. I think people are focusing focusing much on the quality side for sure. They're focusing on the single vineyards, and Rioja has a lot of on offer on that side. They've got a lot of diversity. Small plots. We talk about the average plot size in Rioja La Vesta is very small. 3,000 square meters. So there's a lot of small plots, a lot of different plots that you can. So there's offer. There's a lot of offer to make special wines in Rioja, and also those vineyards are often blends of different varieties which you're not allowed to plant today, which the DOCA doesn't allow us to plant. So you've got planting material on these vineyards which you're not allowed to plant today in Rioja. So you already got something special. Then you got the age of the vineyard, where the site. You got so many different things in these vineyards that make them really special. So yes, I think for the wine consumer that's looking for quality and something special, there's definitely a focus on that. But then again, Rioja produces so much wine in comparison to what we actually produce in these small vineyards that really you're a drop in the ocean. So I think there's an important thing to notice. Like when I thought about when you talking about the Swartland earlier, how 10, 15 winemakers or wine companies, were able to change the image of the Swartland. It's because the Swartland was producing bulk wine, but not as much as Rioja is producing, bottled wine. Rioja's producing 300 million liters a year. That's 400 million bottles a year. If you look at the really small percentage of what you are when you're producing these single vineyard sites or these special vineyards, percentage-wise, you're such a small percentage in comparison to the rest of Rioja that's getting sold. So in effect, the image of what you're creating is not that great, not that big of effect.
I think we do our best, don't we? You do, and I do, and the people we admire do, to persuade people that Rioja deserves to be taken as seriously as Burgundy or Barolo in terms of these single site vineyards and how exceptional they are. I think we're getting there slowly, but you're right. The mass of Rioja is very hard to get past in a way, and that tends to be the style that most consumers identify with, I think.
Yeah, for sure. But once you've traveled to Rioja and you've done a bit of wine tourism, and you realize, hang on a second, It's really special. Yeah.
Listen, I'm going to make you king of Rioja for a day, and I'm going to give you magic powers. Absolute dictator for a day. What would you change about the DOCA forever? Is there a way out of this current crisis of overproduction and cheap prices?
Well, we're talking about a crisis, but I think Rioja's had 7 very good years of full production. Because don't forget, it's a continental climate where normally we have every 3 years either hail, frost, or some other climatic problem, really dry, extreme dry. We've had 2 extreme years of heat and dryness, but we haven't had a wipeout of hail or wipeout from frost like you had in 2017. And I think so. That's part of the reason why I think there's a bit of overproduction from Rioja at the moment, which is creating a bit of a crisis in the wineries because there's just extra wine. There's too much wine in the cellar to be consumed. But what was I going to say?
What would you change? Your magic power.
What would I change? So what do I change? I think you need to bring back the exclusivity in Rioja. It needs to become exclusive because if you got too much wine, you can't do anything with it. So you need to make the wine exclusive again. You have to reduce the production, and in a way, the DOCA does control the amount of tonnage you produce per hectare. But I would be a bit more extreme. I would go a bit more. I would probably take away irrigation and take away herbicides and take away inorganic fertilizers and those kind of things, which would be a huge commitment towards quality. Saying, right, in the whole year, we're not going to work with glyphosate or herbicides at all. That would change Rioja. Because Rioja, in a sense, is trying to be, it is Spain's quality DO. Priorat as well. But when you talk about the volume and the amount of, and to really set yourself apart from the rest, you got to say, listen, we've got a limit of yield per hectare, but there's other things we can do. And I think one of the things they should do is definitely start moving towards the direction of saying, listen, no more glyphosate or no more herbicides or no more irrigation, or, we're going to make real true terroir wines, and start working towards that. So that's what I would do.
I wondered about tasting bottles that get onto the shelf, very cheap bottles that end up particularly in Spanish supermarkets on offer and things like that, and removing the DO from them, making the tasting, the qualification tasting to be given the DO, the precinta, the back label, much tougher, really clamping down on that stuff, the cheap rubbish. Really.
Well, there's actually no tasting of the finished product.
Yeah.
So, in South Africa, your wine has to be submitted once it's been bottled or in tank before you bottle, and then you have to submit it every 2 years. Otherwise, you can't export it. Where in Rioja, your wine is submitted after fermentation. Literally, you got to submit it 3-4 months after fermentation. I mean, my whites aren't even finished fermenting when I have to submit them. And they have to be dry. So for me, that's a big error as well. And in the way the quality control in Rioja, it's very easy. I mean, it's great. I love it. But it's not controlling what's actually being put out there on the shelves.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Final question is, how do you get away from wine? I know you once restored a Model A Ford pickup. Is that still an interest of yours? I mean, do you like cooking? I mean, what do you do in your spare time?
I like to cook every now and then, but I prefer to braai, obviously, being South African. But yeah, I do enjoy still restoring. I restored a couple of old cars growing up. My father was big into old cars and kind of rubbed off on me. So yeah, I restored an old car together with my dad when I just finished school, which is an old Model A Ford pickup. It's pretty nice, pretty pristine. Actually, quite proud of it. And then I went on restoring actually other cars for other clients as well. And during my 2 years of gap year, I was restoring other cars for people, and that's how I paid for my wine harvest throughout the. I'd go work for a harvest 3 months of the year, come back, restore a car in the garage, and then go off again on harvest. And that's kind of how I funded my harvests. Yeah,
I love it. Yeah. Have you still got family in South Africa?
Yeah, my parents are still there. My brother lives in Cape Town. Yeah. Okay. Still have family in Cape Town. Yeah.
And you still go back on a regular basis, don't you?
Yeah, we go back. I go back once a year at least, and then with the family we try and go once every year or every second year. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're still a South African living in Spain rather than you haven't become Spanish yet, have you?
No. I still, you still like to braai, and I still like to go out. So Unfortunately, you can't make a fire on the balcony, so it's kind of like, every now and then you got to kind of go back to South Africa just to make an open fire, just to feel free again, So,
listen, Bryan, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I mean, I love what you're doing in Rioja. I think they're really exciting wines, and they're wines with real personality and that are focused on vineyards. And we've talked about the white wines, in particular these cabezadas.
Yeah.
It's been great talking to you. See you very soon in Rioja, I hope, or if not in South Africa.
Tim. Yeah, we'll catch up soon. Thanks a lot. All right, cheers, Tim. Ciao.
Great to get Bryan's views on both South Africa and Spain, and to hear why he thinks Rioja is such an exciting place to make wine. Next week on Cork Talk, my guest is the Master of Wine, Fernando Mora from Aragon. Join me then. Thanks for listening to Cork Talk. If you want to read more reports, articles and tasting notes by me, go to my website, timatkin.com. You can also follow me on Twitter @TimAtkin and on Instagram @TimAtkinMW. See you next week.